Fellas, Khamzat Chimaev is unbeatable and will never lose a fight in his entire MMA career. We obviously just had Dricus du Plessis versus Chimaev, where Chimaev put on nothing short of an absolute domination over Dricus du Plessis. People complain saying that he didn't really damage Dricus, but the point is 50-44. Absolutely dominated one of the greatest middleweights across 25 minutes and obviously got the belt by beating Dricus du Plessis. In his career so far, if we just have a quick career recap, dominated the regional scene, knocking out Ikram Aliskerov. Comes over to the UFC, dominates his first few fights in the UFC where he just picks people up, slams them, ragdolls people, and that's where he got all of his hype. Then takes on Gilbert Burns, which was his first real tough test in the UFC. Took on Burns, had an absolute war with him. Some people say it was a robbery, went into deep waters, but regardless, beat Gilbert Burns, and that was his first tough test in the UFC. Then he took on Kevin Holland, subbed him in 2 minutes, pure domination, shot the takedown, got him to the mat, got the submission within 2 minutes. Easy fight for Khamzat Chimaev. Then he takes on Usman, again, his second, or arguably the toughest test of his entire career, where on short notice he takes on Usman. Now, to be fair to Chimaev, he absolutely dominated Usman in the first round. He 10-8'd Usman in the first, or nearly came to a 10-8 against, like I said, the former welterweight champion. Later rounds started to slow down. That's kind of where we saw the gas tank of Khamzat Chimaev get put into test, but he had a very close fight with Usman, ends up picking up the win, was quite controversial. That's probably the toughest test of his career. And then we kind of see Chimaev change a little bit. He kind of goes from this cocky Chimaev that's hanging around with the likes of Darren Till to this new calm version of Khamzat Chimaev that we saw in the fight week of the Robert Whittaker fight, and then obviously takes on Robert Whittaker, and this was when Whittaker was on a 2-fight winning streak, just knocked out Ikram Aliskerov. I think he was a bit of a favourite as well coming into the fight with Chimaev, and Chimaev, it was very simple. Shot a takedown on Whittaker immediately, got him to the ground, mauled him for a couple of minutes, and then got the face crank on him, and when he cranked that jaw of Robert Whittaker, obviously he fucking snapped his teeth out of place, and that was where I think Chimaev kind of got a lot of the hype back that he might have lost during the Usman performance after he absolutely dominated Robert Whittaker. And then he finally takes on Dricus du Plessis, the middleweight champion of the world, and this is when Dricus was undefeated in the UFC. I think Dricus might have been a bit of a favourite coming into this fight, or is like a very close odds. Dricus was the reigning champion of the middleweight division, on track to becoming one of the greatest middleweights of all time, and by far the best middleweight on the roster was Dricus du Plessis, and Chimaev dominated him. Fair enough, you can use the argument that didn't really damage him, but the performance that he just put on Dricus du Plessis across 25 minutes, taking him down, and again, it's similar to what people used to say about Khabib. Everybody knows what Chimaev's going to do, and nobody could stop it. Dominated Dricus du Plessis, gets the win, and people are going to complain saying that Khamzat didn't damage him, he didn't really go for the finish, didn't really look like he was damaging Dricus du Plessis, but we're talking about Dricus du Plessis. This ain't just no bum, this ain't no can. This is Dricus du Plessis, 23-2 coming into the fight, the reigning middleweight champion, by far the best middleweight in the UFC. So even though Chimaev might not have damaged him, it ain't like he's fighting a can. So I feel like people need to give more credit to Dricus du Plessis, and he 50-40 forward him. That's one of the most dominant scorecards you could get. When do you ever see a 50-44 scorecard in the UFC? To get that over Dricus du Plessis, to win every round and get arguably a 10-8 in the first as well. Super impressive for Khamzat Chimaev, and he's now the champion of the world, undefeated in the UFC, massive run in the UFC, a bunch of good names on his record as well. And listen, I'm not saying he's flawless, because unbeatable doesn't equal flawless. He has flaws, you know. He's got questionable stamina. It's no surprise when you take Chimaev into the later rounds, that's usually where he starts to crumble and fade. He has got pretty weak striking. He's not like an Islam Makhachev, where he's very well rounded. His striking's obviously not really up to par, and he's very predictable. You know what he's going to do: shoot a takedown, take the fight to the mat, try and implement the grappling. But I just feel like the man to beat Chimaev doesn't really exist yet. Like, I feel like Chimaev versus the entire middleweight division right now, I don't see anybody beating Khamzat Chimaev. If we start off, we've got a couple of matchups in the middleweight division. We've got Imavov versus Borralho, which is meant to be the #1 contender fight. We've got Hernandez versus Dorida, which is another fight that's kind of been announced as maybe a potential other top contender fight. But if we look at Nasruddin Imavov, for example, the first middleweight contender now, Imavov's biggest strength is the striking. He's one of the best, if not the best striker right now in the middleweight division. Knocked out Adesanya, TKO'd Cannonier, looks good on the feet in every single one of his fights, and like I said, one of the best strikers, and definitely a better striker than Chimaev. Even has a bit of wrestling too. Not really known for his wrestling, but he's displayed good wrestling in a couple of his fights. You've got Nasruddin Imavov. However, just like Chimaev, Imavov isn't flawless either. He got mauled by Brendan Allen in the first round, and Allen's a good grappler, but again, if you're getting mauled by Allen early on, I can only imagine what a guy like Chimaev can do early on in the fight. He also got taken down by Jared Cannonier as well. Nothing significant with the wrestling in the fight, but he got taken down by Cannonier. Even Adesanya was able to trip Nasruddin Imavov and counter him, so I feel like this will be a fight where Chimaev shoots a takedown, gets him down to the ground, and pulls off a submission. I see Imavov as maybe just a bigger threat than Whittaker. You know, slightly better grappling, maybe a bigger finishing threat on the feet. I just see him as a slightly bigger threat than Whittaker, but I feel like the outcome would be Chimaev by some sort of finish. You've then got Randy Dorida, who's now managed to creep himself into top contendership. Now, obviously, Derrida, he's stylistically quite a tough match for Chimaev because it's because of his jiu-jitsu. He's known for his elite BJJ, comes from a big BJJ background before the UFC. He's displayed it in the UFC so far. He has got next-level grappling. And not only his BJJ, but his clinch work too. Super effective in the clinch, roughing people up with knees and elbows. He is one of the most tricky grapplers in this division. However, again, he's not flawless. He got taken down by Gerald Meerschaert, the same guy that Chimaev knocked out in about 10 seconds. Gerald Meerschaert, good BJJ, awful grappling, and he was able to take down Reinier Derrida at moments during their fight. He was also taken down by Borralho. Now, to be fair, that's not too shameful. Borralho has got this massive wrestling background, but again, if you're getting taken down by Borralho, I can only imagine that a guy like Chimaev's going to be able to take you down too. And I just feel like he's too weird and jittery. He's not like a technical fighter. He's a little bit too weird and jittery for my liking against Chimaev, and we've just seen that weird doesn't work against Chimaev, as he just faced the weirdest fighter in the UFC and 50-40 for him. So again, I feel like this will be a case of Chimaev taking him down, not necessarily finishing him, but kind of roughing him up with ground and pound and just manhandling him the entire fight to pull off a decision win. So I feel like Reinier Derrida, he's a weird threat, but he likely gets dominated across 5 rounds. I don't see him getting a finish over Chimaev unless he pulls off some sort of submission, which I think is unlikely. Again, I can see him being another Chimaev victim. We've then got Caio Borralho at number 6 in the division. If he beats Imavov, he's going to be getting a title fight. Borralho's a bit of a tricky fight as well for Chimaev because he's got really good striking. Again, I'd say he's one of the best strikers right now in the middleweight division. Really good striking, and he's also got wrestling too. He showed a lot of wrestling early on in his UFC career. He's probably one of the most well-rounded contenders right now in the middleweight division for Khamzat Chimaev to face. However, there isn't too much flaws of Caio Borralho, but we've kind of seen him before sparring Chimaev. Again, it was only a spar, but from what he looked like, Chimaev was dominating him in those spars, and he was out-wrestled by Muradov earlier on in his UFC career. Without a doubt, I assume he's improved, but so has Chimaev. So again, I feel like this fight would be quite a competitive fight. I do think Chimaev would win the fight because of the wrestling. I don't think there's anybody in this division right now that's anywhere close to the wrestling of Chimaev. So I feel like it will be very similar to the Dricus fight, just out wrestling Borralho across 25 minutes, maybe even getting a late TKO finish. So I feel like for Borralho, he either gets finished early on by some sort of finish, some sort of submission like Whittaker did, or he makes it competitive across 5. But regardless, I don't think he beats Chimaev. And then we've got Anthony Hernandez. Hernandez is one of the best grapplers in the middleweight division. I'd go as far to say, apart from Chimaev, he probably is the best grappler. People calling him modern day Cain Velasquez, takes people down round after round. Some of the best stamina in the UFC, absolutely wears people out. Great ground and pound, great submission ability, and he's just one of the best grapplers right now in the middleweight division. However, again, isn't one of the most flawless either. He does lack the striking. His striking has improved. He saw that in the fight with Roma Delidze, but Hernandez isn't one of the best strikers in the division. On the feet, he does kind of lack it, which kind of takes away a threat that most fighters kind of pose against Chimaev. He also faces a lot of adversity. He got out grappled a couple of times against Brendan Allen. That was a very back and forth fight. In the fight with Michel Pereira, he faced adversity early on, and he doesn't really tend to do well at the beginning of fights, which is usually where Chimaev kind of shines. So he does face a lot of adversity, and he's very small for the middleweight division. Dricus is big for the middleweight division, and Chimaev manhandled him. So I kind of fear for Hernandez when he's quite small for the middleweight division, when he faces a guy as big as Khamzat Chimaev. So I feel like Chimaev, he'd either get some sort of TKO on the feet against Anthony Hernandez, or more likely just manhandle him in the grappling exchanges, and manhandle him in the grappling, win a decision. So I feel like for Hernandez, he wouldn't get dominated like Dricus do. I think because of how good his grappling is, he put up a bigger test, but I still think he gets a little broad for at least the first 3 rounds, until in the later rounds he obviously puts the pace on Chimaev. So who do I think is the biggest test in the middleweight division for Chimaev? I'm going to say it's Anthony Hernandez, just because, again, he is probably the second best grappler in the division. I'd say mainly because, you know, he's got way better cardio than Chimaev. The longer the fight goes, it's going to favour Hernandez. He is another mauling grappler, similar to Chimaev. He mauls literally everybody, and he has good improved striking. Not a great striker, but it's evidently improving. Maybe that's where he can kind of mix things up on the feet with Chimaev. I'd say the second biggest threat is Caio Borralho. Yeah, Borralho's just a better striker than Chimaev, and he's got decent wrestling. I think Borralho would be tough because he's dangerous everywhere the fight goes. Obviously, when it comes to wrestling, Chimaev's going to be better, but because of how good he's on the feet, I think the well-roundedness of Borralho would come into play. I think the third biggest threat would probably be Reinier Derrida. Yeah, Derrida has got nasty BJJ. I'm not saying Chimaev would get submitted, but he has got really good submission ability, really good anti-submissions, and he's got elite in the clinch as well. Chimaev always shooting takedowns, easy to get in the clinch. That's kind of where Reinier Derrida shines. He doesn't have to shoot a takedown against Chimaev. And I'm going to say number 4 is Imavov. Not that Imavov's an easy test. Look, I'm wrong. He's a great striker and he's got solid wrestling, but I don't really see any massive differences performances that he could do that maybe somebody like Robert Whittaker couldn't do. So all the biggest threats in the middleweight division, I don't really see doing anything to Chimaev. And if we're talking about the rest of the middleweight division, I mean, MVP, I guess, can climb into contendership, but I think MVP on paper might actually be the easiest possible fight you could give to Chimaev, because MVP's wrestling sucks. You put him against the best wrestler in the UFC, he's getting subbed in 30 seconds. Paulo Costa, another name that people are throwing about there. Costa could actually be a stylistic threat, but we've seen Costa get out grappled before, and he's just too inconsistent with his performances. I think Chimaev manhandles Paulo Costa. You've then got Adesanya and Strickland, who is still in the mix, but let's be honest, neither of them are either getting a title fight again, and these guys have been out wrestled by Dricus, and if we saw how Dricus performed against Chimaev, I think Chimaev subs both of these guys early on in the fight. So I really like, regardless of who Chimaev faces in the middleweight division, I'm not saying there isn't any threats, but I just don't see anybody beating Khamzat Chimaev. After that performance he put against by far the best middleweight in the roster in Dricus du Plessis, I can't see anybody posing a threat to Chimaev. Now, who does Chimaev remind me of a lot? I think he reminds me a lot of Khabib. I know that's what a lot of casuals kind of compare him to, but he reminds me a lot of Khabib. First reason, they've both got super dominant wrestling. Everybody knows what they're going to do. Nobody can stop it. His wrestling is some of the most dominant in the UFC right now. He's dangerous as fuck with the grappling, just like Khabib. Their submission ability, their ground and pound, their ability to kind of, you know, when they get a good grip on somebody to really damage people, really dangerous with the grappling. They both lack striking. Khabib isn't like an Islam Makhachev where he's more well-rounded. They both have their eggs in one basket where it's just purely in the grappling. You know what they're going to do, but you can't stop it. You know that Khabib's going to take you down, you can't stop it. You know that Chimaev's going to shoot a takedown in the first 10, you can't stop it. They're both undefeated. They've never lost a fight in their career so far, so he kind of reminds me a lot of Khabib, and I think he's going to have a similar career to Khabib in the sense that he's going to have a couple of defenses. Let's say he gets maybe Imavov, Hernandez, maybe even like an MVP. He defends the belt a couple of times, maybe has a couple of close fights, and then retires after a few defenses. I can see his career going very similar to Khabib, and I think he's the best wrestler in the UFC right now. And we've got some good wrestlers in the UFC. It isn't like he's by far the best, but I would probably say Chimaev is the best in the UFC right now. Like I said, we've got a lot of good wrestlers in the UFC, but most of these wrestlers, it takes time to get going with the wrestling. They have to set the takedowns up. They have to mix the wrestling up with the striking in order for it to be effective. Whereas Chimaev's game plan in every single one of his fights has always been shoot a takedown in the first 10 seconds, and nobody can stop it. You know what he's going to do. He's going to dive for the double leg in the first 10, and no matter who he faces, strikers, grapplers, well-rounded guys, nobody can do anything about it. Chimaev's always super dominant with the wrestling, and he controls it for the whole fight. Like I said, everybody knows what he's going to do. Nobody can stop it. And I feel like that's partially why I think Chimaev's the best wrestler in the UFC. And that's why I think he's unbeatable. I'm not saying he's never going to have a close fight. I'm not saying he's flawless as a fighter. But I just don't see Chimaev ever losing in the UFC. I think with all the contenders we've got right now in the UFC, there's a lot of threats to Chimaev, all in their individual ways. But I think all of them conclusively don't really pose a threat, in my opinion, enough to beat Khamzat Chimaev after what we just saw him do to Dricus du Plessis. So let me know your thoughts. If you agree, disagree, do you think Chimaev's going to lose? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.